Hi, my name is Ruben Echeverría, and I am the chair of the Commission on Sustainable Agriculture Intensification. On behalf of the Commission, we thank all of you for inviting us to provide this keynote, and we are very sorry that we cannot be there, so we are sending this video. The Commission promotes innovation for transformative change in the Global South. So we want to advocate for investments in innovation for sustainable agriculture intensification in the Global South. So that's our main task, and I will show some of the results. We are not finished yet, we are not done, so I will show some of the evidence that we have collected so far in the last few months. We want to build evidence and have scientific evidence, numbers to prove our case. So you are going to see some of the results on how much is being invested, how much more we need, and perhaps pathways for innovation in the Global South. So why are we doing this? We want to influence these global investments. We believe that there is plenty of funding available that perhaps could be reoriented for sustainable intensification. And we think that the innovation areas that we are looking at are science and technology, but not only science and technology, also innovation in finance, innovation in policy, and in social institutions. So we are funded by the CGR, a global network of international public agricultural research. One of the programs is funding us is the Water, Land, and Ecosystem Program. We have 21 commissioners from the Global South. Well, the challenge is known to all of us, so I will go very quick here. Population continues to grow. We have less land, less water, climate change, obesity, hunger, poverty, and the list goes on and on. This is just a summary on the huge challenges that agri-food systems are facing. The increase in food demand, how much of the world landscape is being utilized by the agriculture, the emissions that the agri-food systems generate, and the decisions are taken in a very decentralized manner by millions of farmers. So it's not an easy challenge to promote sustainable ag intensification, having a very decentralized and of course very heterogeneous agri-food systems, which are very different, the ones in Asia, from Africa, and Latin America, and beyond. So that's the challenge that we are trying to help. We are not providing the solution, but we are trying to provide an element of that solution. So to achieve those major goals, to reduce poverty, improve nutrition, save the planet, and a few other great things, requires closing mainly three gaps by 2050. One is the food gap. Apparently 50 to 60% more calories will be needed. So that's a major food gap. The other one is the land gap, that we cannot continue to intensify by expanding the land area. For us, intensification means conserving, being a bit more conscious about agroecology, and trying to do more with less. And also mitigation is a huge, this is the time to talk about climate change. So this is a huge challenge, and we need to keep the agreements. And finally, the equality gap. Inequality has increased, and we think that agri-food systems, sustainable intensification, and innovation in sustainable intensification can really help reduce that inequality. So we need solutions for all of these big challenges. So one of the ways to find those solutions is to say, can we shift the focus from food security to nutrition security, not only focusing on the quantity of food, but the quality of that food. So sustainable agri-food systems, diet quality, diversity becomes very important. Addressing the fact that producing enough food globally does not necessarily ensure equitably global access, because there is enough food around, but we have a huge challenge of affordability and access to that food. So, and the rest of the challenge that you can see in this slide. So managing that contribution from agri-food systems or all together is that we are trying to be as broad and inclusive as possible. So we're looking at innovations to meet this challenge. And the definition that we use is a broad definition. We are not only restricting ourselves to one solution, where we're saying, well, no, we want to look at productivity, social, economic, and environmentally. So you can see here that we want to we promote the increase in production, the increase in productivity, but at the same time the preservation of those ecosystems. Without those ecosystems, we are not going to be able to increase productivity, and at the same time increasing resilience and also profitability. If it is not profitable, it will not happen. So private firms, civil society, entrepreneurials will do the innovation with the help of governments, agencies, universities, and many others. So that's what we're after. We are after a very broad definition that includes environmental, human, and social aspects, and nutritional livelihood, as I mentioned before. So the not so good news is that globally, not much is spent on public agricultural research. Now, this is a very restricted view of public agricultural research. What we are doing in the Commission is much more than public agricultural research. We are looking at the innovation, including using the knowledge generated by public agricultural research. But if you only look at public agricultural research, which is what we can measure so far, there is not much being invested. And it needs a lot of rethinking, new priorities. For example, should we keep investing only in cereals? Or in addition, not stopping that, but in addition, should we look at fruits and vegetables, and fisheries, and forestry and agroforestry, and livestock, of course, very important. So, too little spent, and this is only one slide to show that the intensity in this case means how much is being reinvested into agricultural research from agricultural production. So if only $1 is invested from $100 produced by the agricultural sector, if only $1 of those 100 will be reinvested into agricultural research, we say the intensity is 1. And as you can see here, the intensity is less than 1 in the global south, in low-income countries. Even Brazil is close to 2, but China is growing much faster. These are a little old numbers, but still India is growing, but the rest is not much. Only the high-income countries invest close to 3% of intensity. So we are facing a big challenge of solving many things, and we have very little investments on the core part of the knowledge generation, which is public agricultural research. That's a big challenge to try to fix and promote advocacy to invest more in public agricultural research. So these solutions to ensure that we can feed 10 billion people by 2050 without increasing emissions, without cutting the forest, and without increasing poverty should include a few things. And these are just suggestions coming from the literature. We have reviewed a lot of the literature on sustainable intensification in the Commission. One is reducing food waste. You can see the details in the slide. The other one is linking agricultural intensification with natural ecosystem protection. That's a very good way of intensifying instead of expanding. We also realized that farmers to survive had to diversify, not only intensify. Well, so we were talking about intensification is within that reality context at the farm level, that the farm should be diversified. Now, within that basket of activities that are done in the farm, we could intensify much more to make it happen. And then promoting technological innovation, of course. So, in sum, sustainable intensification, agroecological intensification, and climate smart agriculture are not that far apart. We believe that these concepts are very close together, and there is no room or time or budgets to divert into too many academic discussions. I think we should join forces and look at a way of moving ahead. So this is a shared goal: sustainable intensification as an approach to use innovations. Agroecological intensification focuses exactly on ecological process, which is great, and climate smart agriculture also looks at sustainable intensification. So all of these concepts are related. Now, what's the evidence? That's the introduction. So what's the evidence? Well, we want to estimate what's the current investment in innovation, not only in public agricultural research, but in innovation in the Global South. That's a baseline. We want to also find out how much will be the funding gap. Based on that evidence, how much would we need to achieve the impacts and the goals that I just mentioned. We also would like to identify the most effective approaches and instruments to invest. It's not enough to say we need more money, but it would be fantastic to say, and these are the pathways how to, where the windows for investment that are efficient, effective, they're transparent, and so on. We want to learn from pathways or all of those countries and farmers and civil society organizations and many others that are already doing it. Many places are really innovating in sustainable intensification. So we are trying to collect a few case studies, for example, in Brazil, in India, and in Kenya. We also try to define metrics so we can see 5, 10, 20 years or more from now if we achieve it. So we want to have some indicators first, and then some metrics inside those indicators to say, well, we are making progress or not. And finally, we also want to find good financial instruments, as I mentioned, that, for example, you can pay for environmental services. There are many ways of doing it. Now, soil carbon sinking is one key potential huge market in the future that we are all looking at that. So those are is kind of a summary of the evidence that we are. Let me show you what we are finding. So on the how much is being invested, the best estimate that we have is that only 60 billion US dollars are being invested per year on innovation for agriculture sustainable intensification in the Global South, which is perhaps 4% of the total output. But if you take China out, perhaps it's only 1 or 2%. So not much. It looks as a big number, $60 billion, but not much. It's not really. So that's our main finding. Now we're saying that within that total of 60 billion, a small fraction of that, only 7%, is focusing on environmental goals. And less of that is focusing on social goals. So it's not only that the total investment is not too much, but the priority, the inside of that investments are not that well focusing on the topics that we just discussed, on the environmental and the social. They are more looking at production productivity. So we think that if, for example, if half of that, of the funding that we have today already could be reoriented towards the sustainable ag intensification goals, that could be a major progress. So that's one of the findings. Now, who is investing in this? Well, governments are the main source of these investments. We are always talking about the Global South, but China, of course, is ahead with perhaps half of the total investment. So it's amazing the amount and the share that China represents in this total. Now, of course, India and Brazil contribute about 5% each, and the private sector about 20%, and international development agencies, international development partners, and so on, about 10%. So that's kind of the share where the 60 billion are coming from. Where are they going? Mainly to crops, crop production, and some inputs, fertilizer, other chemicals, machinery, and so on. Less than 30% of the total is going into fisheries, aquaculture, livestock. And about 20% of the total is being invested in cross-cutting key investments, including agronomy, natural resource management, soil, water, and natural resource management for farming. So that's the evidence on how much is being invested. And the development partners, the main partners are bilateral donors, and you can see the split there on the rest. Philanthropic foundations about 10%, and multilateral about 20%. Now let's look at the gap. So that was the baseline. Now let's look at the gap. The best estimate that we have of the gap, how much more will be needed to achieve a few things, with a lot of assumptions. And you can read all of this is available in our website. So I don't have time now to go in detail through all the assumptions, because there are many studies estimating the gap, and this is just one. It's about $15 billion per year. That adding 4 billion for agricultural research and development, and adding 6 for scaling technical climate options, and close to 5 for water modernization gives a whole package of how that investment can be reorganized in order to achieve hunger, climate, and water objectives. So that's coming. You have the source there in the slide, and in the website you will see most of the details. The same study is showing that to fill the gap, investing that 15 billion that we don't have yet, the return will be huge. The return will be amazing on that investment. So it would help meet the Sustainable Development Goal 2 in some percentage. It will reduce emissions. It will improve water use in agriculture, and so on and so forth. So there are some good estimates and details there on how much this will achieve. It won't fix everything, but it will be a good element, a positive element as we move forward. So with that, I really thank you. Those are the main evidence. We have a few more in our website. I really thank for the invite. We believe in the Commission that this is possible, that this is not a dream, and that many countries are doing it, and governments and private sector and farmers and civil society and international agencies are all behind this. So if you stay tuned, we are going to finish the work of the Commission in about 4 months, and we will be sharing all this evidence in our website. So I hope this is useful for your discussions, and on behalf of the Commission, again, we really thank you for your attention.
So thank you, Ruben. My name is David Shearer, and I'm continuing on from Ruben's presentation to give you some insight, particularly to the role of the private sector. So as Ruben outlined in the Innovation Investment Baseline Study, we know that there's about $60 billion of overall investment in innovation, particularly in the Global South. And as you can see, the private sector makes up about 20 to 25% of this overall investment. But I also want to outline the particularly important role of private equity and venture capitalists, although only a small component at the moment, are probably the most rapidly growing investment sector over the past 10 years. And if we look at the role particularly of the private sector, and as Ruben noted, the private sector's predominantly focused on input supplies. So about 50% of the overall investment is made into these input supplies, and about 50% is very much focusing on marketing And that's a particularly important aspect to take innovation to scale and get it into the hands of end users as the primary source of the food system. But then I also want to draw your attention to the important role, as I said, of private equity and venture capitalists, particularly those funds coming from outside of the value chains that we work in. And here, although only a small sector, it's a growing component of the market. But what's really critical to understand and realise here is because of the newness, the costs associated with particularly starting up new financing that's predominantly driven through private equity and venture capitalists. And you can see here that a significant proportion of the funds are used in the establishment of those funds. And to dig in, and we also know from the investment gap study that Ruben outlined in his keynote that the private sector is going to make up about 13% of filling the $15.2 billion gap. And we shouldn't think about this as anything but an opportunity for the private sector to be involved. And as Ruben pointed out, as we collectively look to fill this gap, it's critical that we address issues around not only the productivity growth from sustainable agricultural intensification, but just as importantly, the environmental and social outcomes required. And here, digging into the role of private equity and venture capitalists, not only does this table indicate in terms of the costs associated with that, but it also outlines some of the typical fund cycles and those costs associated with the investment that's required in this space. And so I wanted to leave it here. I wanted to really emphasize the critically important role that the private sector plays, the catalytic and growth role that private equity and venture capitalists play in this area. Importantly, I want to emphasize the rebalancing required across components such as delivering on environmental and social outcomes. I wanted to emphasize the importance of doing this collectively. National governments, private companies, venture capitalists bringing in new kind of money, and also development partners as a key catalytic source of that funding. We need to look at it in the long term, over long periods of time, and we need to look at our risk appetite as we engage in these significant opportunities in transforming the global food system. Thank you.